Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of the Wall of Champions, an F1 podcast. And stellar driver lineup ready to go for tonight's race to actually talk about two races in a back-to-back. First of all, welcome Matt to the podcast. Good evening, Matt.
Hey, everyone.
And Luce. Hello, Luce.
Good morning!
I'm sure it is somewhere in the world. And hopefully Greg will join us sooner rather than later. But we have got a lot of stuff to get through because due to me going to Sydney last week to quit my job, we have two races to go over. So first of all, we'll switch to what happened in Belgium, which was the return after the summer break. And it was Mercedes, and I think everybody predicted that. But I think maybe we were a little bit surprised to see just how close Ferrari were to them. What do you think of that, Matt?
Yeah, it was a pleasant surprise.
And Luce?
It was much closer than certainly what I thought it would be. And had Ferrari got, something extra in qualifying, perhaps they would have even won the race.
Well, I mean, Lewis Hamilton said that, didn't he? He said that if Seb had started from pole or got him off the start, then he thinks that Vettel would have won the race. So, there's a lot of fear, I think, from the Mercedes team that they were actually quite susceptible. And I don't think anybody really predicted that, did they? Like, we all thought that Mercedes was going to probably dominate Spa and definitely Monza, which as it turns out, they did. But it gave us hope for the rest of the season, I think, that perhaps the Ferrari is a better car than we've given it credit for, and we've given it a lot of credit, to keep up with the Mercedes on a track that should really suit the Mercedes. Matt?
Yeah, I think, they definitely gave it a good shot, and that probably down to a couple of things. One, I've just done a bit better job recently in Silverstone in upgrading their car, and those upgrades working definitely helped. And then second thing being, of course, the tyre selection that got chosen in Belgium with the ultra soft, super soft, and soft helped them out. But yeah, I think it seemed that this style of track gave Ferrari a good opportunity to get close. But I agree. I think in the race, Seb was able to stay with Lewis at every single point and even put him under pressure on the same tyre. So a bit of a shame that when he had the softer tyre towards the end, it just kind of wasn't up to the task of following another car really that closely, and in the soft tyre probably being better at the end of it. They probably got closer than they thought, so it's not all bad news.
Yep. Alrighty. Well, moving along, just having a look at qualifying. Obviously, it was Lewis Hamilton who took pole, and in doing so, matched Michael Schumacher's 68 pole record. It's quite an achievement, really, for him to do that. And obviously, when we got to Monza, he then went on to break Michael's record, and he's now the driver of all time to hold the most pole positions in Formula One. So it was there's been a good couple of back-to-back races for Hamilton. Obviously, he's won both of them as well. So just looking at qualifying, I was a bit surprised to see that Red Bull were quite easily the third best car. They actually had they were actually very close to Ferrari, particularly Verstappen. Verstappen was only 0.3 off Bottas and being on the second row, and was only a tenth off Kimi as well. So. And Daniel was half a second behind Max in qualifying at Spa, but and then obviously Hulkenberg put at P7. So we're seeing at a true power circuit, which Spa is, that as they did during their dominating years, Red Bull were able to go there with a good chassis and make up for their straight line speed deficiency by trimming wing off the car because they've got a fundamentally better car. Based on the evidence that we saw at Spa, where Ricciardo, mugged Raikkonen and Bottas to get himself onto the podium, and where he had the really, really strong result at Monza, and I think Max probably would have had a strong result as well at both of those races without his problems. Can we definitively say now that the Red Bull is right up there in terms of having the best chassis. Like, are they neck and neck with Mercedes or with Ferrari, or do we actually think that they've got the strongest car, Luce?
Well, at the start of the year, they certainly didn't. But I think since obviously, I can't remember, was it Spain, where they brought the sort of almost it was described as almost a B spec upgrade. Obviously, that car has improved. Well, the car as a car and chassis, as opposed to the entire package, has improved quite a lot. And even we saw at Monza, the fact that really that car has no right to be anywhere near where Ricciardo put it in the race. You know, make some good overtaking maneuvers and keep up with cars that should have been fast in a straight line, but because they could trim wing off it and the car still be competitive, I think that sort of shows just how good that chassis.
Yes. Yeah,
Yep.
It doesn't sound like he's going to finish that thought.
I'll finish it.
Yep.
I think I'll probably divert it a little bit, but I think what will ultimately prove that is how they go in Singapore, because I agree they've made really big jumps. That's been proven out in the last 2 races.
And yep.
Yeah, and I just think because they put that big upgrade on in Spain, but they weren't that good at Monaco. That to me said they still had a bit of work to do. So it'll just be Singapore will be a good test to see if they've gone away and been able to do that work. Hungary seems to suggest that perhaps they're still a little bit off, slightly, but not very far at all. And then Singapore, I think, has a bit lower power effect than Hungary. So if they've really closed the gap with the chassis to being 0, it'll show up next week.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just switching to the major incidents then that we saw at Spa. There was there was a little bit of.
Where do we start?
Well, I mean, there was the initially there was the Fernando Alonso, his rageathon on the radio, and then leading up to his eventual retirement. But I think more importantly, we saw obviously, and this has been done to death, so I don't want to harp too much on with it because everybody else has spoken about it. But the coming together of the Force India drivers, and we know that Perez took responsibility for what happened on the first lap. I actually think he was less responsible for what happened on the first lap than what happened later on in the race.
I agree.
Ironically enough, because he was pressured from the left by Hulkenberg off the start on the first lap on the run to Eau Rouge, and on the right from Ocon. And I thought Ocon was actually, he was really ambitious on the first lap. But what he did later on in the race when they came together was just normal, and Perez squeezed him into the wall. I am absolutely flabbergasted that the stewards did not see did not see the good grace to actually give Perez a penalty for that. I'm shocked by that. I mean, I know they tend to go a little bit lax on inter-team battles, but Perez fully deserved a penalty for what he did in the second incident at Spa when he almost squeezed. He almost turned Ocon into jam against the wall on the right-hand side. And I remember, I'm old enough to remember what everybody said about Schumi when he did that at Hungary against Barrichello back in 2020.
There's a bit of a difference between the two, though, but yeah, I can see what you mean.
Well, I don't think there is too much of a difference between the two, but I'll let you pick it up from there.
Well, the difference being Schumacher made his move early, didn't move again. As soon as he came, I think where the start-finish line at Hungary is about a couple hundred meters after the final turn. About that point, he started moving right. He was in the middle of the road, and Barrichello had a choice of going right or left. Barrichello should have known, because Schumacher was still going to the right, that he was going to keep going. Barrichello chose to go to the right. This incident, I think, was just a bit different in that.
But moving in a 45-degree angle isn't one move. You've still got to continue straight. Like Schumi.
Well, no, that's what he did. If you watch his onboard, he didn't move his steering wheel after he made that first move. That's I think where people get it wrong. Like people think he moves again to try and put Barrichello in the wall or squeeze it. He didn't.
Yeah, but I think regardless of that, what we saw from Perez was just as bad as that. Like, if you want to say that Schumacher did something awful and terrible that day, which most of Formula One seemed like they wanted to do and still do now, you can't let Perez get away with what he done. How did you see that, Matt?
Yeah, I think from if I was in Ocon's seat and I was having a look at him, I think if someone had more experience than Ocon and was in that position, they probably would have been able to tell that gap was closing. Not saying that he caused the accident, but someone with a bit more of experience would have avoided it, let's say. But he's well within his rights to use the momentum he got out of the first corner to try and get alongside Perez. I think Perez knew he was there and tried to squeeze him with and that's what Michael did as well. He tried to squeeze him, which is obvious, but I think Barrichello had a bit more momentum and was next to him, so Michael left him enough space to get through. I mean, I don't see, not the worst thing in the world, but so anyway, back to the Perez one. He moved over, and I think at that point Perez needs to recognise that Ocon deserves a bit of room to be able to, you know, not get alongside him, but at least have the room to race with him, and then especially taking into the account the fact that they're teammates. I think Esteban could have maybe avoided it by not putting his nose in there, but Perez is 100% at fault for the contact, and I think he needed to recognise that Ocon was entitled to a bit of room, especially given the other comings together they've had and the first lap incident. I think he really needed to. He wouldn't have probably lost the place anyway, because I don't think Ocon had such a big run on him. But
I think that's where Ocon needed to recognise that he probably wasn't going to pass Perez there. Like,
yeah, but he actually did. Oh, on the first lap he actually did. But yeah,
yeah, but
the
Perez
first time. I'm
the...
speaking of the second incident where they made contact. Like,
Yeah.
he wasn't really. I don't think he would have passed him there.
Perez was in the wrong mode on the first lap, wrong engine mode, and that made the speed differential massive.
Yeah,
and looked quite massive. But I think, you know, Ocon by that kind of point, I would have been surprised if he passed him into Eau Rouge. But having said that, he had got his car to a position where he was entitled to some room, especially from your teammate.
yeah.
And Perez didn't want to give it him, and that's where Perez is completely wrong in saying that, you know, it's not his fault or Esteban should have lifted. That's all got completely independent of what he did, which was to squeeze his teammate up against the wall, which any team manager should slapping your wrists for.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to welcome Pierre Bear to the stream, who sent a message saying hello, good evening. Well, good evening our time anyway, and feel free to shoot through any questions you might have. So, it's for me, it's inexcusable to risk having somebody out of the race like that at high speed into a barrier. Say what you want about Ocon getting a good run out of turn one and then getting a little bit alongside. You, as a driver, you know, it's a trust exercise. You have to trust that if you're alongside another car, that car's not going to, you know, legitimately try and kill you. And I think what Perez did was beyond the pale, because any accident there, particularly the way the wall juts out, if you look back the way that because there's two separate walls there, there was the potential there for Ocon to have a career or life-ending accident at that point of the track. And not only that, the risk wasn't all on Ocon, because as we saw with Perez, who got himself a puncture for what he did, he could have had the mother and father of all accidents going through Eau Rouge with that puncture if he hadn't realised he had it earlier. And I just don't understand, even taking out the fact that they're teammates, and I know this has been brewing since, Ocon wasn't happy after Montreal, and then Perez wasn't happy after Azerbaijan, and this has been brewing for a while between the two of them. They don't want to They don't want to give a quarter, and that's perfectly acceptable. But even take out the fact that they're teammates. You can't drive like that. You cannot drive in a series like Formula One and think that everybody's going to be comfortable driving around you when you have the potential to put somebody into the wall because you're not happy with them at those kinds of speeds. If you run them onto the grass, if you've done what Magnussen did the Hulkenberg at Hungary, or what Alo did to Palmer at Spa, or those kinds of things. Yeah, you're on the grass. It's a dick move. You get a penalty for it. But if you've got a wall there, and the potential is for that driver to have a heavy contact with the wall, and you're okay with yourself wanting to do something like that, because I still haven't heard Perez apologize for it. So if you're the kind of person who's okay with doing that kind of thing, I don't want you on the grid as a spectator. Or
that's just Perez acting with a big head, thinking he's a big driver when he's not.
Yeah. Anyway,
I think it's the driving standards of. I think you'll find all the old guys aren't quite used to this. People driving each other off the road, sort of thing, and onto the grass, or putting people into walls. I don't think it used to happen back in 30 years ago.
Of course not, because
it didn't even happen 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
Racing was a lot different. It used to be like, you don't make contact, you follow each other like the AI do in F1 2016. They follow you around the corner and you just go side by side everywhere.
If in the 60s and 70s, if you put somebody off the road, the chances are you were a murderer. I mean, that's how it was. Yeah.
Now it's revered. Every time someone throws someone else off the road, it's revered as like, how strong defense there from Magnussen or whoever.
He's a real racer.
Yeah, and that's not right. Like it shouldn't be like that. You should be called a dog every time you push someone off the road or run someone out of track.
For sure.
For example, Felipe Massa at Monza.
And we'll get to that. So I just want to make a more overarching point, and not only that, like even what Fernando Alonso done, and everyone knows that I've got a lot of time for Alo. What he did to Palmer was unacceptable. You can't do stuff like that. There was plenty of room where Alo could have just given Palmer enough room, and Palmer would have still lost time, but he felt the need to run him off the road into the gravel.
Yeah,
it's unacceptable.
And I think even you'll find I think Massa did the same thing almost to Verstappen.
Well, Massa just flat out ran into Verstappen.
Yeah. Yeah. But he was trying to do the same thing, trying to run him out of road.
Yeah.
And I think what people have been saying is that you've got guys now coming off the brakes to use all the road.
Yeah. And so that's what Palmer accused Alonso of at the second chicane at Monza, where he said, Fernando just out, he just came off the brake and he tried to straight line the apex. Yeah. And he ran me out of road. It's like, I did watch that, but I think there's a difference in that kind of thing where you've got there was what Alo did was a legitimate overtake, and Palmer should have seen it coming. It's different when you've got the guy behind who's battling with you and you run him off the road. If you're on the inside and you put in an overtake, and the guy's like, well, I'm just going to turn in anyway and shortcut the chicane and keep the position. That's wrong. Yeah. You don't do stuff like that. But it's much more dangerous to be putting guys off the road. If you voluntarily go off the road like Palmer did to keep position, then that's one thing. If you're shoving other guys off the road, then you're a scumbag.
Yeah.
So and I think
it should be reviewed like that.
Yeah.
I still think cutting a chicane to overtake someone. I do not know how he escaped with only a 5-second penalty, something like that, because that's black and white cheating. That's flat out. That's as clear as you can get. He's cheated to pass someone.
Yep.
And all he gets is 5 seconds.
So what I wanted to ask is that if you look at the season as a whole, and obviously last year there was a lot of pressure on the stewards to say, we want to let these guys race, blah 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 blah, stop handing out penalties all the time. We want it to be a more pure racing series.
Yeah.
If we take into account the fact that Seb got off very lightly for what he done at Azerbaijan, and I know that the consequences of that were pretty minuscule, but you can't have cars deliberately crashing into other cars. So Seb got off very lightly at Azerbaijan. We've seen numerous incidents this year where drivers, Perez is just one of them, where drivers have done something that if they had done it 10 years ago, they would have had the book thrown at them. And I'm worried now that, first of all, the stewarding is incredibly inconsistent, because we saw Magnussen
User joined your channel.
Welcoming Greg to the episode tonight. We saw with the stewarding at the Hungaroring, where Magnussen got a penalty for having Hulkenberg off the road, and then we saw Alonso not be penalised for doing exactly the same thing at Spa. I get worried that the steward's not only inconsistent, but they're actually allowing the drivers to get away with a lot more than they should. So I'll let you go first with that one, Luce, and just what you think about that.
Well, for any Australian fans out there, especially from the southern parts, it's starting to feel like how the Australian rules umpiring is, and it seems to be.
I had to throw in a random AFL reference, but there you go.
I know, but it's a bit obscure for Formula One. But
Ask this guy watching if he knows.
He's French. I doubt it.
What I'm trying to get at is that the umpiring, refereeing, stewarding, it's. Instead of it being, just bad and poor decisions being made, it seems to be more directive from someone up above to allow this kind of behaviour to go on, and it's starting now to, I think, ruin the product that's being put out there, and certainly the driving standards. And I think it's beginning to get to a point where we're going to see some monster accidents, and the driver who causes it is not gonna, he's not gonna get either penalised properly, or he won't know what he's done wrong because he would have done it in the past and gotten away with it.
Yeah, I guess that's my position. What would you contribute to that, Matt?
Well, it's good for the show, I guess. Watching people throw each other off the road. I think that's what they're thinking when they're being very lenient with the penalties. But I guess they need to establish. Maybe this hasn't been done, but they need to establish the standard that they want to achieve driving, rather than just saying arbitrarily, "Oh, we're going to let you race." Seems too much on that. That's what's leading to the randomness of it. It's a little bit down to too much to interpretation of like what frickin' Johnny Herbert thinks one week, or what Mika Salo, who's happy for him to have a punch up, He'll let him off, and this guy, Derek Warwick's like, no, you can't touch each other. Like, it just needs, and they need to get together, the people that are making the decisions, and work out what level of driving standards they're happy to accept. If and the drivers will drive to that. If they're happy to see things like Magnussen throw Hulkenberg off the road, or if they're not happy to see that, then that approach to penalising should be applied everywhere in that sort of situation, which means that
needs to be written down somewhere.
Yeah, Alonso would be given 5 seconds for what he did in Belgium. He forced another car off the track, and I agree with you, Webby. I think in a defensive scenario, it's much worse than it is than when a driver is attacking somebody and they're both braking late.
It's the difference between
crunch point comes.
It's the difference between Alonso and Palmer at Spa and Alonso and Palmer at Monza, where Palmer elected to go off the track himself. He wasn't forced off the road.
Yeah.
I
think that's what I think. But it is interesting watching them race as hard as they can, and I guess if it leads to other overtakes, then
yeah. All right, well, bringing Greg into the conversation now just to catch him up. This discussion started with the much-discussed Perez-Ocon incident at Spa, the second one, where, Ocon almost became jam against the wall, courtesy of Perez. And then, obviously, the broader question being, is the more lax approach to incidents this year actually meaning the drivers are taking a step closer to actually causing serious harm to each other, particularly if you consider the Ocon incident and the Ocon Perez incident, the fact that Perez went unpunished for that, and the what happened with Seb and Hamilton, and how much there should be a token gesture made that says you absolutely under no circumstances do you make deliberate contact with another car like that, and How do you see the stewarding this year, and do you think that it's creating an environment where the drivers are really testing the limits about what they can actually get away with?
Yeah, I've not been a fan of their new approach. I think there needs to be some kind of standard established. So Yeah, if they leave it to the drivers, something bad's going to happen. Inevitably, what happens, because they've gone. It's a cyclic thing. They tend to let them race for a little while, then something bad happens, and then they clamp down on it.
They go too far.
They go too far. They need to find a happy medium. I don't understand why they have to go one way and then the other. So I don't know. I don't think they know what they want to do with it. To be honest, I think there's the commercial pressure, and then there's the sporting pressure, which is make it a clean sport.
Yeah.
But I think there needs to be some kind of standard established, because that it's bad when you just let drivers do what they want, because it filters down to the rest of motorsport as well, and even grassroots. Kids see it and they do what they see their heroes doing, because if they can get away with it, then they should be allowed to.
I mean, we saw so much get said last year. Sorry, I'll give you a second. I'll just say we saw so much last year and the year before about people being really critical of Max Verstappen and the way he drives, and the moving under braking with Kimi and all those kinds of things. I think we all accept that moving under braking is completely unacceptable. Like, you can't do that kind of thing because it triggers massive accidents. So yes. we saw this huge focus last year on Verstappen. Like Verstappen doing this, Verstappen's doing that. He's not allowed to do that. That's just wrong. Someone's going to get hurt. And then this year we have Perez, almost smear his teammate into a wall. No penalty.
I did that. I don't know if that got investigated or not, but he kind of did himself in by doing that, and then he gave himself a big puncture. But I guess what you're saying with the token gesture probably needs to be made. But I don't know. It's the age-old thing. There's never any consistency with these things, so there needs to be some consistency, because they're leaving it so open to interpretation. It seems like more often than not, certain names are getting away with things that other names aren't.
Well,
so.
Even
Hamilton.
Yeah. Oh man, I don't know. I mean, if you go back to Spain, obviously there was the wheel-to-wheel contact with Hamilton and Vettel.
I was going back further, more towards last year with Rosberg.
Yeah.
Running him off the road. I mean, what Magnussen got pinged for at Hungary was no worse than what Hamilton had been doing to Rosberg for 3 years.
Yes. I don't know. There's been selective.
So Magnussen got pinged for that, and then immediately the very next race, Alonso got away with doing it to Palmer.
Yeah, exactly. It depends on who you are, and that's the problem with this. This will let them race, but we'll also have our say every now and then when we feel like it. It's too subjective.
When they're saying we don't want to affect the championship, so they don't want to heavily penalise Seb for what happened in Azerbaijan, or they don't want to penalise Hamilton and Seb for what happened in Spain, because that's just racing. It's like, but you're saying you don't want to affect the championship. There has to be a line. But there's more people in the championship than just the two people who are fighting to win it. Like there's a championship all the way through the field, and if you've got you actually have a legitimate battle between McLaren and Renault, and you've got two of those drivers continuously running each other off the road. Yeah. And an inconsistent application of penalties, they're still fighting for points and money. It's not just It's not just Vettel and Hamilton and everyone else got zero.
I can't help but feel that it's a commercial pressure coming over the top, because the FOM doesn't care about what's going on further down the field. They want an exciting championship. It's their product they're trying to sell. Yeah. And they would hate to see the championship decided on something like a penalty. They want to see them race hard for it. But there's got to be a limit. There's got to be a line. If they just establish the standard, then the drivers, like you say, will drive to that standard.
Yeah. But if there's an accident that decides the championship, then so be it. Like if Vettel or Hamilton can clearly punch the other one into the wall to win the championship, and they subsequently get a penalty for that decides the championship in the other direction, so be it. That's
absolutely.
Yeah, but I think you'll find the top guys around each other don't do that.
No, generally they don't.
Generally, it's a top guy squashing out some knob, or
it's when
in the midfield it's anything goes.
When it's two guys that respect each other, then it's all right. But when there's a differing interpretation of how much someone expects to receive versus what someone's prepared to give to someone they perceive as lower than them, that's when you see accidents.
It's basically Hamilton and Vettel versus Hamilton and Rosberg.
Yeah, pretty much.
No respect between Hamilton and Rosberg. Plenty of respect between Hamilton and Vettel.
Yeah, like Alonso and Webber at Eau Rouge. That's respect right there.
Anyway, I've cut Lewis off about 3 times, so I'll let him have the floor now.
The only point I was going to
make... No, don't worry about it,
mate. was when Greg touched upon the driving standards filtering down to to the lower category of racing. I think we've already seen that, you know, F2/GP2 is just, well, it's been a wreck fest half the time, you know, in recent years anyway. So, and we've had drivers
it even
come
affects
from there.
sim racing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's it. It's personal now.
It's personal now. It
It's
affects all of
personal.
us.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's starting to become, you know, like you fire up F1 2017, you go into a random lobby and you're at Monza and you're starting at the front. You know what's going to happen just about every time. There's going to be some idiot who thinks he can get away with it, brakes at 50 meters and causes an accident.
No, I think that's a little bit different.
It's a little bit different. One thing that has persisted, though, in all racing for a long time is that whole, if you no longer go for a gap, you're no longer a racing driver. That was a very damaging statement to make, I think.
That's probably the worst statement a racing driver has ever made.
No, because they take it literally.
Yeah, I know.
And it's not meant literally.
Yeah.
It's
So,
not meant every gap. He didn't say every gap that opens up, go for it. Like, that's not what he was saying.
He wasn't
But you
saying
can't prove he
anything.
wasn't saying that.
He wasn't saying anything. He was just talking shit to defend
Only
taking out Prost on purpose.
Yeah, what he's trying to say is have a crack. Which is, and Dan Ricciardo is the best embodiment of that,
He's
to
so
be
good.
honest.
yeah.
He's so good.
So I wanted to get to Ricciardo. I mean, I don't want to wax lyrical too much about Daniel Ricciardo because it just sounds like four Aussie
But
guys.
I will.
Aussie guys sitting around talking up a guy who's from the same country that we are.
Yeah, look, I honestly don't care where he's from. He's so good.
I mean, it's if you look
Oh,
at
he's
his
from
race,
Perth, WA.
if you look at
Yeah.
his race at Spa, the thing that impressed me most about his race at Spa, even more so than the fact that he just managed to get himself onto the podium, he had one chance to get himself on the podium at that race. Like, he had that one safety car restart, and he had to pass two cars, and he made it happen.
Yeah, he's so good at it that I see it happen and I don't think much of it anymore. I just think, oh, well, there you go. There's Ricciardo passing everyone again. That's just what happens, you know.
He is. I mean, we haven't seen him fight for a title yet, so you can't say he's the complete package. But in terms of the maximizing his opportunities on a racetrack or nailing an only half their overtake by making it happen, I've only ever seen him fail at that once, and that was where he had his ping pong moment with Seb last year at Spain. Every other time I've seen him do that, he's made it work. And it's just phenomenal to watch a driver who maximizes every result like that. And after qualifying, you think, oh, Max is half a second ahead of him. Yeah, Daniel's going to get rolled. Daniel's going to get rolled this weekend. And all of a sudden, at the end of the race, he's on the podium. And I just find I don't think that I've ever seen a driver in the sport, maybe short of Schumacher. And I mean, I don't want to get into comparisons between Ricciardo and Schumacher because there's no comparison. But
I reckon that's a fair comparison, to be honest.
I mean, Schumacher was also a guy who, if he only had one chance to win a race, he would nail that chance. So
Yeah, he was always there or thereabouts.
yeah, you buy yourself a ticket. To use the old analogy they say at Bathurst, you buy yourself a ticket to have a chance at the race win, and generally, or even the podium or a maximum result. And you've got to take that opportunity when it comes along. Like at that time when, that brief second where you've got your window of opportunity. I don't think I've seen a driver outside of Schumacher, but with Ricciardo, certainly on the current grid, who's capable of seizing that opportunity. We saw it at Azerbaijan. We saw it at Spa. Seen it so many times with him where he snatched a result that
Was it all his race wins as well, pretty much?
he won at Malaysia last year, being chased down by Max after Hamilton's retirement. Max was on fresher tyres. Max was going faster. Daniel, there was one lap of battle between the two that I think Red Bull were probably going to let him get away with, and Daniel kept the position. When Max had his one chance to pass Daniel, he couldn't make it happen. Instead, Daniel made it happen for himself. So it's just he's just super impressive, and for me, he was the driver of the day at both Spa and Monza for that. But it's also impressive to think that it's not like Verstappen's been slow. Like, Verstappen has been just as fast, if not faster, than Ricciardo at both of those races. Excuse me, and bad luck has kept him from getting those results. So Red Bull could be in a really good position if they could get both cars to the finish without incident. Greg.
Yeah.
Or Matt, we'll go. Yeah, we'll go first, Matt.
Okay, I'll go.
Yep.
Yeah. I think you do need to separate Ricciardo from Verstappen a little bit in that regard. It's hard to draw comparisons between their years on race day. I think Max has probably had the edge in qualifying this year, but in the races, Daniel's definitely made the best of what he had, and I think he's changed the way he sets the car up to take a little bit out of his qualifying and be better prepared for the race. But yeah, his overtaking is something that that only the great drivers seem to be able to do what he's showing us he's able to do. So I think long term it'll be a good feather in his cap if he has to fight for a title for those bad days where something does happen in qualifying or something happens on the first lap and he's got to fight through. Those sorts of days win you championships. So hopefully he gets that opportunity and we can see him make the most.
Yeah. All right. And I want to switch to you, Liz, but I want to add something to it. That we see that Verstappen is also well capable of the overtake, right? Like he's obviously very, very good himself. But what we usually see, we also see a lot of incidents from Max that we just don't see with Daniel. What do you think of the battle between the two, and how do you rate Ricciardo? You already said that you think the Schumi comparison in terms of maximising results fair. Where do you think he stacks up in the current grid and his racecraft?
His racecraft would have to be. I reckon racecraft. I couldn't separate him and Alonso in racecraft. In maximising result, obviously. Probably got the nod ahead of Fernando because Fernando he does make the odd mistake here and there, and obviously he gets grumpy.
What mistakes?
He hasn't been in a position to make mistakes.
Yeah, that's what I mean. List me a couple of mistakes, and I'll agree with you.
But at the same time, I haven't seen the racecraft either because he hasn't been in a position to do the racecraft.
Well, we saw what he did. We saw what he did the Palmer at Spa, but I mean. I know that more than anything, Alonso's just frustrated at the moment. So
yeah,
but we did see back in his championship years, his racecraft is mint. Like
I think
he made a good start in Spa. He passed Sainz in Hungary. We had that one chance on the fresh tires after the pit stop, and he passed him into turn. Well, he's got it. Don't worry.
I think Alonso's still got it, but the way Ricciardo's driving right now is reminiscent of Fernando's drives at Ferrari.
Yeah, the 2012 ones.
And I think
what
Alonso's own quote about himself, I think, can be just as easily applied to Ricciardo, where he says, "I might not be like the quickest driver over one lap, but like over a championship, I'll beat anyone." And I think Ricciardo has a lot of that quality.
Yeah,
and he has his race, but the actual stuff he does, like overtaking people, I just don't remember Alonso ever doing something like that. Like maybe he hasn't had to. But Alonso's very clever as well. Alonso's very clever, but it's not been like spectacular. Like
Alonso kind of just did all his stuff on his first laps. And, he reads a rate better than anyone in that regard.
He's very clever.
And then he gets his car where it doesn't deserve to be, and then just hangs on.
That's right. Whereas Ricciardo just makes it happen somehow, like just from miles back. Like
exactly. Like Alonso would never pull a move off that Daniel did on Kimi on the weekend. He's never done that.
The thing is, though, I was expecting that move from Daniel. I was expecting it at that very corner as well. I'm like,
he'll difference.
Yeah, but I'm like, he'll do it. No one else would do it, but he will try it. Yeah, he'll probably make it work.
Yeah, he did it at the Bottas last year. Same deal.
Yeah.
So, but Luce, a comment on the Ricciardo's ability to stay out of incidents that it seems his teammate gets involved in.
Yes. Yeah. For whatever reason, I think Verstappen, maybe he hasn't quite found that limit. Trying to find the right words. I think he just oversteps the limit when attempting, obviously, similar maneuvers to Daniel, and then I think he's still, a bit young and immature in some ways, where he thinks he can make an opportunity out of something, and it's just not there.
There's a level of desperation in what he does.
Yeah, and you see that with his not so much with his attacking all the time, but with his obviously defensive maneuvers when he's got faster cars behind him, as we saw last year a few times. I think he still hasn't quite found out or figured out that he should. There's times where you've got to, not fight, and there's times where you go for it. I think once he figures out that balance, he could be just as good racecraft wise as Daniel.
Yeah, I've no doubt.
Yeah, to me,
2015, he pulled some amazing stuff off. Like
He did.
he knows how to overtake. I think just the hungry thing, where he panicked a little bit, like Daniel was on the outside and he really wanted that spot there and then.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing he needs to get out of his game.
He just
a
needs
little,
to calm down a little. That's it.
Yeah, and by little I mean like tiny fractions. And
Yeah.
It'll happen when he just gets more experience.
That's right.
He realizes like the race is 70 laps and not.
And the season's
laps,
20
so-
races, that sort of thing.
Yeah, like that.
Play the
When he gets
percentage
into a
game.
championship fight, when he gets into the day he's involved in a championship fight for the first time, that's when you'll see him learn those qualities.
Yeah, because it hurts that much more when you lose the
Yeah.
points,
But right now,
He doesn't give a shit now. He just wants the race wins if he can get them, He's
Yeah.
pissed off with Renault, I think, more than anything. So, yeah,
Well-
he just needs to calm it down a bit. But I think the teams can see that, so that's why they all want him.
Yeah, he's
well,
gonna be a team leader somewhere one day.
well,
You want it to be your team.
but does the big red team want him, or does the big red
Yeah.
team want his teammate?
Teammate.
I'll take either of them.
Well,
I think
Yeah, they'll take who they can get. I mean, you can only get one of them. You're not gonna get.
it sounds to me like they want Verstappen long term as their number one, but right now they want Ricciardo as potentially a number two.
yeah, I think Ricardo's too good to be a number two.
Well, I agree, and he won't go there for that.
No.
Nor should he.
Not only that, I think that even if you put him in a team and tried to make him a number two, his mere talent would rise to the top. I don't think. I don't think that Seb's 2014 season against Ricciardo was necessarily representative of Seb's overall skill level, but at the same time, I think that the battle between them would be close, but I don't think Seb holds a big enough advantage to be able to just beat Ricciardo week in, weekend out.
Absolutely not.
Without
No.
the team actually manufacturing the result, and
Yep.
good luck getting away with that. With driver and fan base alike.
They won't.
They won't
Seb's
do it.
3-year deal is not a 3-year deal.
Yeah.
Oh, it's 2
With-
years. With
It's
an
a
option.
year and see how we go at the end of the year.
Yeah,
it's,
so-
it's much more likely that Bottas will take that second seat. I know we've discussed this off the.
yeah.
Off
That
the-
sounds more sensible. If Seb is to really stay the 3 years.
Yeah, they'll
it'll
take
be something like
Bottas
that.
probably, yeah, and then Ocon to Mercedes.
Yeah, I think we worked out the 2019 grid already.
We did, yeah, we sussed it out.
We sussed it out.
So the other
Not much change.
yeah. So the other thing, of course, is that there's 14 drivers on the grid who would kill to be driving that Red Bull, and there's only 2 drivers who are trying desperately to get out of it at the moment. And there's no reason that Red Bull can't actually turn this around next year. The token system's gone. Renault can actually go ahead and completely rebuild their power unit if they want. During the removal of the token system means that we can see an absolute toss up of the competitive order into next year. So there's no reason that Renault can't show up competitive next year and Red Bull wipes the floor with everybody. At which point the point is moot. Ricciardo nor Verstappen will go anywhere. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
They're not going to leave a winning car.
no, they're not. But conversely, at Ferrari, I think that Ferrari are right to be worried, because I think that if Seb wins the championship this year or next year, I don't think he'll see out 3 years of his contract. I think he'll retire. I think if he wins a championship at Ferrari, that will be enough for him, and then he'll go and raise his kids and those kind of
Yeah,
things.
and that's when they'll want Verstappen. But yeah, that's a big if.
Yeah, but I mean, to play devil's advocate with Max Verstappen, and I'll ask this one to you, Luce, because you've been a bit quiet lately. To play devil's advocate with Verstappen, you've seen the way he's been this year. He's obviously hungry to win, but generally in Formula One, only 2 cars are capable of winning, even on the best years.
Yep.
He's been very, very open this year about, he's rolled Red Bull and Renault under the bus more times than once this year in what is easily the 3rd best car.
Yep.
Is Verstappen the kind of driver psychologically or that you want in a top team? Is he the kind of guy who's going to play the company game, or is he going to be like, out there trashing the team to the press kind of thing, as Hamilton has been prone to do on occasion over his years in the sport?
Well, there's a couple of drivers. Fernando has done that.
Well, that's different.
His career as well.
McLaren are at the back. McLaren can't.
No. But I'm not just saying McLaren. I mean, he's done it at Ferrari. He burnt bridges, and
well, he did it. He did it at Renault when he infamously accused the team of not supporting his championship because Fissy had the audacity of beating him at one race.
Yeah, and then obviously McLaren the first time round when Hamilton was there. Obviously, these guys are extremely competitive. I think teams can see that. And obviously, with the year he's had, I think teams sort of sympathise with him a bit and can see, why he's so frustrated. I mean, even though I personally don't like him all that much, I have started to feel a bit bad for him because we just haven't been able to see what he's been capable of. He's been in some great positions, and his car's just given up. So I think at this stage, teams would take the gamble on him. Obviously, still being young and a bit immature. And I think they think that he could mature a bit and be that driver for him. Obviously, the talent is there. He's as talented as anyone has ever been in the sport. And if he can just rein in, obviously some rough edges, I think silly not to have him.
Very good. All right. So another question is: within the next 5 seasons, do you think that we'll see a Verstappen versus Ocon championship?
Possibly.
That was just a question that just came to me when I was sitting here looking at the standings. All right, so I want to shift gear now. We've got about 14 minutes left that we'll run for. So obviously we saw one of Formula One's most prestigious records fall at Monza. We saw a driver become the most pole-sitting driver of all time in Lewis Hamilton. Surpassing Michael Schumacher's mark of 68 pole positions. Hamilton now leads the way with 69. Difficult to think that anybody's going to catch that in the near future at all, and obviously Hamilton's going to stretch that into the 70s, probably the 80s. He could even go into the 90s yet. So how do we... I think the key difference for me is that Hamilton's got 69 pole positions and what's he got, 53 odd wins or something like that? Versus Michael Schumacher, who got 68 pole positions and 91 wins. And Michael's conversion rate of pole position to victory was extraordinary, and his ability to win from positions other than pole was also extraordinary. How do you look at the Hamilton versus Schumacher dynamic in terms of overall records? And do you think it's just that Hamilton's now the leading pole sitter of all time? And I'll start with you, Matt.
Yeah, I think we've discussed before the reasons for that pole to race participation difference between Michael and Lewis. I think the record itself, I mean, there's no doubt that Lewis is a great qualifier. He fully deserves to have the pole record. He's got, I think his pole to start record is similar to Senna's, and that's a pretty good achievement when you think about how many poles Senna took and how everyone raved about his qualifying laps, etc. So Lewis deserves to be there, but comparing Michael's speed and ability to Lewis's speed and ability based on poles is just not really representative. I mean, Michael, as we've always said, Michael rarely had the fastest car, and the fastest car is what normally gets on pole position, and Hamilton's had that for at least half of his career, and definitely the last 3 years. Whereas Michael probably only had the fastest car in 2001, 2002, and 2004, so 3 of his 20 years. And he was Dr. Pole in Monaco in 2012 as well. So
and he would have won that race as well. I'm adamant. He would have won that race.
Lewis has just equaled Michael's record actually in Monza.
All right.
But,
so
some of Michael's most dominant years though were at a time when you had to qualify with your race fuel. So
and
it
that
wasn't
as well.
Strategically it wasn't always best to go light and go for pole. So
yeah, and
That's going to affect his pole record big time.
That was in 04.
Yeah.
That 03, 04 in that era, which I listed 04 as one of the years that he had the best car. But you have to say that during those years with the tyre war, the Michelin was the better tyre over one lap as well, which probably didn't help. So Bridgestone Ferrari did tend to run heavier those one lap qualifiers to negate the advantage Michelin had on quali day for the race. And but Michael still put his fair share of fucking magic pole laps in. If you about Hockenheim 04, I'm sure you've watched that video. And
well, any pole positions he got in '96 absolutely didn't deserve to get, based on the car.
So,
but he got
Michael's ability to take pole positions in changing conditions as well was unbelievable.
Yeah, I just think his win record speaks volumes for how good of a driver he was, because his pole record is not as spectacular as you would think it to be.
Yeah.
When you compare his wins to his poles, then you can appreciate just how good he was as a driver.
And the rules are quite different now, as when through the bulk of Michael's career, when you had specific qualifying engines and those kinds of things. Parc Fermé wasn't so much of a thing through the bulk of his career, obviously. There's a lot of differences between the sport now, where qualifying's merely a step towards the race, whereas back in the day, qualifying was an event in of itself. And then you reset again and started from fresh overnight. So to throw to you now, Luce, and to add another question to it, looking at the way Hamilton has now, he's breaking that pole record now, and the comparisons we're making to Michael, because it's inevitable. Does Hamilton's breaking of Schumacher's record actually do more to solidify how big of a GOAT Michael actually was, when you actually take all of that into account, and the way that, particularly when you compare Hamilton's now pole record against Michael's by far and away, by some significant margin, win record? Does Hamilton taking this record actually go to make you think and go, well, geez, Michael was still a hell of a racer, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think, in some sort of weird way, seeing Hamilton break it, you give it a bit of thought, and you think, Schumacher did some, obviously just the ratio, he's 60 pole positions in a career is insane. And then you go, okay, we'll add 30 more wins onto that. And normally it's, a driver will get, say 20 pole positions and, maybe 15 or 10 wins. So it normally halves itself, or, you take a quarter of it off, and he's added, an extra, 30 more victories. I think it just shows, obviously, getting to 60, in itself is some of the cars Schumacher drove, as we touched on in 96 and 97. Those cars were, they were pieces of shit painted red as far as I'm concerned. And he still managed to get, pole positions and race wins in 97, 5 for a championship. Obviously, go 98, and that McLaren was an insane piece of work. And even again in 99, the Ferrari wasn't quite as good, and he still managed to get these, pole positions and race wins. Well, I think Hamilton's sort of been blessed in some ways. He's had a race-winning car throughout his...
Hashtag blessed.
I thought about it. And he's been in race-winning cars, with the exception of the first half of 09, he's been in race-winning cars and championship contending cars his whole career. So, and the fact that, and he's had, from 2014 to last year, the most dominant, series of cars that's ever graced Formula One. And you'd have to think even motorsport just about. It's just, it's taken him 3 of those seasons just to get the pole record, where, there's, 60 races in those. So he would have had, 30-odd pole positions in that time. Well, it took Schumacher, twice as long to get that in his career.
Yeah.
Look, Lewis is tracking well in the wins. He's got 59 wins over 201 starts. Yep. Michael scored 91 wins over roughly 300 starts.
If you actually look at their win ratios, they're pretty much exactly the same.
Yeah, so he's tracking well, but you just have to imagine that his day of having dominant cars like the Mercedes will have to come to an end at some point. That's where
Yeah, we'll find out.
that's when we'll find out whether Lewis can match Michael's all-time win record.
If he even stays in the sport.
If he even stays in the sport long enough. Like, for me, surely if you got a sniff of, like, being the most successful driver in Formula One ever, you'd have to take it. But these guys just... They don't realise that after 35, 36, you're still alive. You're not dead. You can go and do all the things you wanted to do. But you won't get a chance to go and break records in Formula One for the rest of your life. So...
Yeah. So we'll give last word to you on this one, Greg, because as the big Schumacher fan in the podcast, looking at, as we said, the race to win conversion ratio is actually really similar to about 30% between Michael and Lewis. But the fact that Michael had to win those races from pole position, a whole lot less times than what Hamilton has. But Hamilton at the end of his career is likely to have a monumental amount of pole positions, probably quite similar to his win count. So, Hamilton will end the sport as on paper probably he'll surpass the likes of Senna and Prost in terms of overall records, of course. Maybe not total championships, but definitely overall records. What do you think of the comparison between Michael and Lewis, and is Lewis a worthy successor to being the new Michael? So when you think about the best drivers, you think Senna, and then Schumacher after him, and it looks like it looked for a while it would be Schumacher handing to Vettel, but now it actually looks like it's going to turn out to be the Hamilton era. Do you think that's fair? Is Hamilton? Do you think Hamilton's good enough for that?
Well, I think it probably comes back to what you said yesterday or the day before. The key thing is that Michael dominated all of his teammates. And you can say what you like about number one treatment and number two treatment, blah, blah, blah. Which is what Ruben said, coincidentally, in 2009. But anyway, Hamilton was really closely run by Rosberg in those 3 years, and he got beaten by him in one of them. And I mean, you can talk about reliability or whatever, but Michael was never in a position for reliability to give his teammates a sniff. So, in that respect, the fairest comparison that you can have is with your teammate. And Hamilton's fought really closely with Alonso, which is Alonso is very good though, so fair enough. But he's also been fought really closely by Jensen. He was outright beaten by him in 2011, and I don't think you can chalk that one up to reliability. And Rosberg, beat him, like I said, last year. So there's still a lot of time yet to run for Hamilton's career, but when we look back on it, we'll see those years, those outlier years like 2011, 2016, and we'll think that Hamilton was kind of average in those years. Whereas,
but I think you got to separate his talent from his headspace, because
no,
I know that if he's not concentrating, then he can get destroyed.
That's a part of a driver's repertoire. You need to be able to perform even just day in, day out. Like it's. I think Michael never let anything like that distract him. Like Imola 03 is an example where his mother's died that morning and he goes out and wins the Grand Prix. Like that's cold, but you know what I mean.
You shouldn't consider it at all. I'm just saying, like,
but over the
when you're going to look at a year, you can't seriously tell me that Button was.
I'm not saying that Button
devaluing Hamilton that year. Because
I'm not saying that Button devalued Hamilton. I'm saying that Hamilton devalued himself by not performing. You're a professional race driver at the top of your game. You're supposed to perform year in, year out. If you want to be the all-time great, if you're trying to tell me like you want to be like the next Michael, you can't be the next Michael by having an off year because I broke up with my girlfriend. Like that's not good enough. I don't care what you say. So, in that respect, I think Michael was always. I mean, and there's different ways to compare it. Like I'm selectively putting aside Michael's years in a Mercedes when he came back to the sport. I only think of him in red. So I mean, I am making selective
Yeah, but
judgments
Michael came
here.
back at 40, like Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I
If
know, I
Lewis
don't
comes
think that
back at
counts.
40 and he couldn't beat Nico at 25, like
So anyway,
whatever
I
they were,
mean,
28, like
I'm obviously a Michael fan. I think Hamilton's a terrific race driver, but I think Michael was someone who was just absolutely totally committed to the sport, and Hamilton might even be naturally a better driver than Michael. He might just have a natural talent slightly better than Michael. But in terms of application, which is so important in top level professional sport, I think Michael can't really be bested.
I think
So
I think the sport's very different now as a driver.
It is.
As
There's no with the testing and all that, you know.
Michael came in, and the reason that Michael was so successful more than anything else was that he just worked harder than everybody else. Like his work ethic was monumental, and that was how he made Ferrari into a team that won 5 consecutive drivers' titles. And his work at Benetton, where he made Lado, Verstappen, Herbert. He made them all look so bad as drivers because he completely destroyed them. Like everyone goes, oh, Eddie Irvine, he almost won a championship when Michael was the best number 2 driver that's ever existed. And then Rubens Barrichello says that he would have beaten Michael if not for favoritism. At Benetton, he destroyed everybody who it wasn't even close. Every driver who drove with Michael got absolutely decimated at Benetton.
And it comes back to the other thing that that was mentioned in this very podcast is that Hamilton's enjoyed car advantages that Michael could only dream about. Like, just not quite a fair comparison. I mean, Hamilton has won some Grand Prix in like cars that aren't the best cars, but they were still good cars at the end of the day. Whereas Michael's won Grand Prix in cars that didn't even belong on the front row, never mind on the top of the podium. So,
to be fair, I've only ever seen 2 drivers capable of doing that, and both their last names started with S.
Yeah, it's Senna-esque, definitely. So
Yeah. So
I
think Alo's put some lemons up there.
He has, yeah, absolutely. Alo has as well, but Alo's still not in the same league. He's
not because I think, and that's where Lewis's story, I guess, takes a dive in that people still consider Alonso the best in Formula One at the moment. Why is that?
Yeah, that's right.
Lewis has got the numbers behind him. You've only got to look at his.
To be fair, I think
scorecard.
There's a bit of nostalgia that plays into that too. To be honest, I think there's a lot of if only he had a top car, he'd be right there kind of thing.
Course,
I think there's a bit of nostalgia that plays into the absolute adoration of Alonso. Although I don't think the adoration of him is misplaced. I think that he probably is still just as good as Hamilton and Vettel. But I think the whole he's still definitely the best driver on the grid thing. That's easy to say when he hasn't had a top car for a long time.
Of course.
Yeah, I know, but people still say it.
There's a lot more depth these days as well than there used to be. Because I don't think anyone ever doubted that Schumacher was the best driver on the grid for basically, I don't know, I would say since the death of Senna until his retirement in 2006. I can't imagine that anyone who really knows what they're talking about and followed the sport closely could say anyone other than Schumacher was the best driver on the grid.
All right. Well,
yeah, I think they started to see like 05, 06 when Kimi and Alonso were there. We could see it changing over, but because of what Michael did in 06, you were still like, if you look at China, still got it sort of thing. Like,
yeah,
those guys were just climbing the ladder still, you could tell. Yeah. So, I think what Seb said on grid, he said Michael will be at the top of a number of lists for a long time and probably forever.
Yeah,
that was a nice comment, and I think probably hold true.
I think that I think what Greg said, and I think the same thing that about what Alo said about himself, which is Michael might not have been the flat out balls to the wall fastest driver who's ever sat in a Formula One car, but you can never tell me there hasn't been an F1 driver who's ever worked harder than what he did for the success that he got.
Most likely, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why it'll be. You're picking the greatest driver. Yeah. You're not picking the fastest. You're not picking the best qualifier.
Senna doesn't have the most wins. Senna doesn't have the most pole. Senna doesn't have the most championships. And everybody still considers him to be the fastest of all time. I think long after Hamilton's retired from the sport and people look back at the numbers, they'll go, yeah, Hamilton. He was one of the greats. There's no doubt about it. Great qualifier. won in cars that oftentimes didn't deserve to win, but they still look at it and go, yeah, but Schumacher set his records when I was racing 16 times a year. That was his competitiveness over such a long period. That's what's forgotten as well, is just how good he was over a 15-year period, over a very, very long time. His performance never dropped off. So, he's...
I think one thing Senna has going for him is that he was a great orator, and I think there's a mystique around him. And,
I'd agree with that.
That's part of it as well. It's a bit of a personality cult.
Yeah, no one's ever articulated the art of driving better than what Ayrton Senna did, and nobody probably ever will.
He got that, he didn't die and then he got that. He had that
he had it
while he was there. You listen to the commentary, Murray Walker and those guys talking about him. At the time, he was considered a god even well before he.
Yeah, I think he articulated the emotion of racing better than anyone ever could.
Yeah,
certainly anyone before him as well had ever dared to. So he put the emotion in race driving, I guess. So
all right,
that's why he's so special.
We've tripped over an hour, so I'm going to give I'll give the last question to this on Loose. We look at Formula One, and you see basically like the statues at Easter Island. These huge images of drivers that cast a shadow over the sport. Your Senna, your Schumacher. In 20 years' time, are we going to look at Hamilton the same way?
I think we will. He's probably, obviously, in American sports, they talk about the Mount Rushmore of whatever, given sport they're talking about at the time. And if you had to look at it now, it would have, obviously, Schumacher, Senna, Prost, and then you'd probably got to think a little bit as to who the next one would be. But I could probably even start sketching Hamilton in there now. Certainly, even if he ended right now, you'd have to consider him up there.
So as fans,
let alone 20 years.
Yeah. So as fans, should we consider ourselves #blessed that we've been able to watch a driver who will. I mean, obviously, I had the great joy of watching Michael his entire career. I caught the tail end of Ayrton's career. That's. We should be all happy to see. A lot of people go, we only talk about the bad things in the sport, and we're prone to doing that as well. But we are living living and watching in an era of a guy who will go down as one of the greats of the sport. So
yeah, but let's think of this, and just to add a bit more importance to it, this title battle this year is super important. Because one guy who we haven't said jack shit about could go to 5 titles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is something special as well. The only person to that is Michael, and that can't be overlooked.
No.
The guy's 5 times world champion.
Yeah, no, I can't agree. But I am curious as to why, and I know we're tripping over time, but I mean, I am curious as to why we talk about Hamilton like this, but not Vettel. Is it a personality thing, do you think, Matt?
Well, no, we're only talking about Hamilton right now because he's just broken a number of records.
Yeah. Just
broken the pole record, and he's been on this streak for 3 years. So he's the flavour of the month. Well, not the month, but he's the flavour of the moment. Whereas when Seb got to the end of 2013, he was everything.
Yeah, that's
4 titles. He's supposed to have beaten Michael's record for championships by now. He was everything, and that's where Hamilton's at now. He's got everything going for him. He's got the car. He's got the pole records. He's winning when at will.
I think Vettel's 2014 kind of killed his mistake a bit, I think.
It did, and then he got in these crap Ferraris for a bit, and he lost a bit of momentum.
It was all right.
This title, this championship, whoever wins it this year is gonna go down as that next person behind Senna, Prost.
Yeah,
they're gonna, or at least take a step towards going down as the person that sits next to those guys.
All right. Well, what I'm hearing is that we should be all very happy that we're following the sport at the time where 2 of the guys, these guys are racing together in the same way that people in the 80s and 90s, watching Senna versus Prost. We're watching 2 guys who are going to finish very, very high up in the records race. All right, so we'll finish up there, but I'm going to finish with final thoughts and a prediction for Singapore. We'll start with you, Luce. Who's going to come out on top at Singapore, and have you got any other final thoughts after the last 2 races?
Oh, Jesus. I reckon Singapore is going to be decided in qualifying. If Hamilton can can, nab pole. I reckon he'll win the race.
If he nabs pole, does he win the championship? In the broader context of the season.
I was sort of thinking, I was sort of thinking that, but I still don't know. It's a possibility, but yeah, I reckon if he gets pole, he'll win the race. But I don't think Seb will be on the front row, at least, and then I think we'll see the Red Bulls on the second row. I think.
All right. Well, I'm gonna ask you the same question, Greg, but I'm gonna throw in one extra bit of information. Obviously, at Spa, we saw Mercedes take their final engine for the season, so they could get away with the little bit of extra oil burning before the new regulations come in. Ferrari still have one more power unit to cycle through their two cars. Taking that into account, what do you think is going to happen in Singapore? And do you think that engine penalties could still decide this championship later on if Mercedes exhaust their supply a little bit early?
Hang on, you're telling me that now Ferrari have got the excess engine?
Yes, that's true. Because Mercedes voluntarily took their fourth engine at Spa, so they could could keep their oil burning.
They've just put it in the pool, the same way Ferrari pulled their turbochargers.
That's right. Yeah, I don't think that will have an impact.
What it does mean is that there's no more development for Mercedes. So if Ferrari bring a step, Mercedes got no response.
Ferrari going to bring a step? Mercedes has got plenty of power, enough to have me worried about what Lewis just said, which is if they take pole, they will probably win in Singapore, but I think Ferrari should have the car to win in Singapore. I'm just concerned that they won't have the car for pole. But since I'm a Ferrari fan, I'll back Seb to win the pole and win the race in Singapore. So I just hope that it's not as power sensitive as I hope it's like Monaco in that those tight corners onto those longer straights aren't going to give Mercedes just that little edge that they need.
All right, finishing up with you, Matt. What do you think is going to happen in Singapore, and what do you think is going to be the biggest thing that decides this championship over the last few races?
It will go down to the last race, and that's not a cliche thing. That's just the way it's been ebbing and flowing, and it'll
just have to stop eventually.
It'll just have to stop eventually, and that place is going to be Abu Dhabi. And look, I don't think Ferrari have anything too much to be worried about in Singapore. I think Seb's magic around there. He's very good around there.
Oh, but
he'll have the car advantage. But
do they?
Ferrari got nothing to worry about there.
But do they have to worry about Red Bull? Red Bull took new power units at Monza.
Nah. Red Bull might get up there. You could maybe, the podium is Seb, Danny, and take your pick out of Max and Kimi, or
Max probably takes Kimi out, and Lewis gets himself onto the podium.
Maybe Lewis gets third.
Yep.
I think Merc have more to worry about from Red Bull in Singapore than Ferrari or than Seb does. I think Seb will be in a class of his own there. He'll destroy the field, and everyone's going to be like, "Oh shit, Ferrari." Looks like they've got the title in the bag now. What a performance!
All right. Well,
yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not done yet.
You're right.
And I'm hoping that we can see Alonso put in a good performance as well on the track.
Forget it, mate.
And secondly, and I'm not done yet. And also.
You'll put in a good performance when Honda brings Spec 4 and then you sign with Renault.
Yeah, that's what's probably going to happen.
That's what will happen. You'll sign with Renault and then Honda will bring the real Honda engine.
I hope that when we're doing this podcast after Singapore, that whatever decision McLaren have made or been allowed to make, it's the right one for next year.
And that's not signing with Renault.
God knows what it is.
I think there's a lot of negative consequences for McLaren to make that move, including the prospect of being sued through the wazoo by Honda for breaking contract. So we'll leave it there because otherwise
we'll pay them back with their own money.
Yeah, we could spend another 2 hours talking about McLaren, but we won't. So we'll call it there. Thank you very much to our panel.
Just make it the hour.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Luce. I've been Webby, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time after the Singapore Grand Prix to do it all again. Hope you'll join us then.
Cheers, Jack.